Hey guys, it's Mark again, and we're ready for step 4, which is experience. Now we've gone through step 1, which is understand why it's great to be creative and why it's so valuable. Step 2 is, of course, believe, because it's really all about believing that you are creative, and hopefully by now you believe. 3 is know. Try to share all sorts of different models of the creative process so that you know what the creative process is and the steps that that takes. And now is experience, where we're actually going to start to experience what it's like to have the left brain or the linear thinking kind of slow down, kind of quiet down, and get to a perspective of what it feels like to experience being in the right brain or the nonlinear thinking mode. And then step 5 is where we put it all together and let you begin. Step 5 is beginning your process and what you want to do and what you want to achieve and how to make that happen. In step 4 of the Passport to Creativity System experience, we're actually going to start to give you some exercises. I'm actually going to start to give you some exercises to do on your own so that you can actually feel and experience the sensation of what it's like to have your left brain kind of quiet down, kind of come from the perspective of the right brain or the nonlinear thinking, the way to kind of drive your consciousness from a nonverbal place. And so there's going to be a series of exercises. I'm going to give you some in drawing or seeing, some that are more focused on how to listen, some that are more physical, like in sports and activities, and others are writing exercises. So you can do them all to try and experience that, or you can do just one that sounds like it's up your alley. But the goal is really to get that sensation of what it's like to kind of be in a different place, have your consciousness come from a more open perspective. One of the easiest exercises is to find one of those magic eye posters where they look like there's like nothing going on, just a jumble of dots or kind of weird looking camouflagey kind of things. They're really, really famous like about 15, 20 years ago. But if you stare at one, you can kind of like look at it, and after a while your brain will start to shift and your perception will shift, and you actually see an image come out of it, almost dimensionally, because there actually is an image in there that's been created. It's just been kind of camouflaged, and our brain is able to let go of the nothing that we see. The left brain kind of goes, this is too much, I can't bother with this. And your right brain or your nonlinear thinking starts to see the pattern, and the pattern starts to shift, and all of a sudden images start to come dimensionally into your view. That sensation is very similar, if not the exact sensation, of becoming kind of that shift from left brain to right brain. I mentioned this idea about the brain the left brain going, this is too much for me, I'm just going to give up and kind of let the, kind of quiet down. That's essentially what happens in almost every exercise to be able to do this, is really you're trying to create, most of these exercises basically generate a sense of complexity that the left brain just doesn't want to deal with. Because the left brain is really focused on trying to help make our lives easier, because it processes much slower than nonlinear. So what it does is it tries to kind of identify ways to chunk information and create shortcuts. And sometimes, those shortcuts are really valuable, but sometimes those shortcuts can lead to things that are, incorrect or make things harder than they have to be, especially in creative endeavors. The best way to illustrate the shortcuts that our brain takes is through a couple of optical illusions that are kind of famous. One of them, there's a lot of them, but one of them is just kind of like this example here, where if you look at the two circles in the middle of each of those patterns, they look pretty different in size. This one here looks pretty big compared to this one. But really, if you've ever, you've seen it before, it's not that new. But basically the idea is here, these are exactly the same size. And, you can tell by the same piece of paper I'm using here to show you that the middles are exactly the same. And it's more of an illusion that is created because our brain uses context as one of the shortcuts to perceive distance and perceive size and perceive relativity. So it's, again, one of the shortcuts that the brain uses. But if we're trying to draw, we're trying to do something creative, we want to be able to see what's actually there. And so part of the deal is to try to overcome some of those shortcuts that our brain puts in place, normally for perfectly valid reasons. So that illusion was just one example. There's a ton of optical illusions online. They're kind of fun to look at because a lot of times when you realize what the illusion is, when your original perception is invalidated, you can kind of feel that similar crunch, like your brain just like, wait, wow, huh? That was the same exact size? What? There's a perception of something different, and that just kind of realization is a really great kind of way to feel that difference between the perspectives of the right and the left brain, because it's just kind of like the brain just realizes that it's been using a shortcut instead of paying attention to reality. This next exercise is the first drawing exercise, and it's one that a lot of students do pretty early on because it really helps you learn how to see what's in front of you. A lot of drawing is really all about learning how to see more so than actually hand skill. So this exercise is called contour drawing, which was developed by a man named Kimon Nicolaitis in the early 20th century. And it's inspired by the contour maps that were drawn for identifying elevation through the edges or contours that you could represent dimension or height on a two-dimensional map. So Betty Edwards, whom I've mentioned before, adapted this technique into what's called blind contour drawing. In blind contour drawing, the idea is really to never look at your drawing while you're staring intently at what you're drawing. And a great exercise for that is to focus on, start with a hand and just kind of make some kind of a claw shape or some kind of a, just not exactly flat, but just something with some depth and dimension. And then what you want to do is you want to just kind of look over there at what you're drawing, and with your other hand, your drawing hand, hopefully, for me it'd be this way. You want to basically try to feel your eye as your pen or pencil moves up and around your hand, and all of the edges and contours and wrinkles and shapes that are there. And ideally you don't want to lift your pencil or pen up, and you never want to look at it the whole time you're drawing. So that's the technique. So I didn't give a lot of instruction, but I wanted you to see what you thought, how it worked for you. But the idea is that you want to focus on the process of learning how to feel almost feel like you're touching the object with your hand, even though you're just staring at it. So your eye traces, you want to have that feeling of like they're completely in synchronicity. But the beautiful thing is there's no expectation of the result. This is not about the result. This is all about the process, and this is all about that getting into that place where you are so focused on something that's so complex, your left brain just can't keep up. So you'll feel a shift and an intense focus, and hopefully a relaxation, because you're not worried about the result, and you'll really get that beautiful feeling. Hopefully in that exercise you also really saw how complex just your hand itself is. There's so much that's going on, especially if you make a shape. But in terms of like the wrinkles, and I know I'm older, so I've got more of them, but still, there's a lot going on in just a hand if you really, really, truly look. And that really, truly looking is what I want to emphasize next, because you don't have to just draw. You can just go out in nature and just really look. If you think about it, we've learned how to process everything in terms of categories. There's a bunch of trees. Maybe there's a pine tree versus an ash tree or something like that if we learn. But if you think about it, every single individual tree is an individual living being. And if you're able to realize that, and you're able to see just that tree and just what's going on in that tree, it can blow your mind, because of the complexity. And again, the left brain will quiet down. And so you'll have that opportunity to have that feeling. I can get excited about things like seeing reality for what it really is, because it's pretty spectacular when your left brain kind of shuts down, lets you see how amazing life really is. And you'll always have that opportunity whenever you want to just see what's really in front of you. Recognize that any living being it's an individual living being, and you're able to see that, you're able to experience that. It's a wonderful feeling. Related to that idea of being able to see what's in front of you, another great drawing exercise is to simply take a picture of something that you want to draw for practice. Again, this purpose is not to make something spectacular. It's just to learn how to feel that sensation. Just take that picture and turn it upside down and draw the upside down image. And what you'll find is there's nothing, for the most part, hopefully, that your left brain will recognize. You're forced to pay attention to the image of the lines and the shapes and the distance from them and the relativity of them. And you're forced to just kind of pay attention to that, as opposed to, oh, that's a nose, or that's an eye, or that's a mouth. You won't know what you're drawing. And as a result, you'll be forced to deal with the complexity, and your left brain will quiet down, and you'll be able to have an incredible experience with the right brain. This next drawing exercise is a real fun one. The idea is to try and find an image or something that you want to draw that has some shapes and spaces in between, so you can focus on those things instead of the objects themselves. This is kind of the foreground versus background shift that occurs that helps you go from linear to nonlinear thinking in the way that that feels. So for example, if I just took my fingers here and I interlaced them, or not interlaced them, but just made these shapes, if you look at the wall, if you just focus on the wall, you can see the green or the whatever color that is. Those shapes are actually organic shapes that the brain doesn't recognize. And so you're forced to let go of any kind of symbols or shortcuts that you have and actually draw what you're seeing in front of you. So it's another one of those great exercises for that purpose. Similar to the blind contour drawing exercise where you learn how to see all the edges and all the intricacies of something, and I recommended going out into nature and observing it there. The same thing can be done with the spaces and the shapes. If you go out into nature and you look for some trees and you look at the tree branches, you can see these really cool organic shapes. You can expand your awareness of shapes and space, and I think it's a little easier outside. You can do it inside as well. But if you can start to look at the shapes and the spaces as the object itself instead of the objects, you can really experience an interesting shift in consciousness. And you start with big branches, but eventually you can go into the leaves, and eventually you could even see things as far as the space in between blades of grass there, and you realize how much space is really there. If you're able to actually shift your consciousness towards the space, it's a really, really neat way to be able to experience that nonlinear thinking. One last thought about the seeing and drawing way to feel that shift is, I don't know if you've ever seen somebody do a live drawing or a still life where they hold their thumb out and they close their eye, look like the classic artists from the 19th century. What they're doing is they're using that as a tool for relative measuring. So they're measuring against their thumb or pencil at a steady distance from the angles or distance or relative size of shapes. And so they're also trying to avoid that left brain understanding what they're seeing and more what's actually going on in front of them in terms of light and shadow, in terms of line, angle, etc. And so that's one of the ways that they can also help themselves stay away from their shortcuts.